Imagine a scenario where the very architecture designed to contain a human being becomes a mere puzzle to be solved through physical mastery. Most prison escapes involve complex tools or tunnels or sheer brute force used to break through barriers. However, there exists a rare category of escape that relies entirely on the manipulation of the human form itself. In the annals of crime history, few stories rival the sheer physical impossibility of what happened in a South Korean police station in the year 2012. It challenges our understanding of biology and physics. It raises questions about the limits of the human body when driven by the desperate desire for freedom. This is the story of a man who literally folded himself out of a cage. The protagonist of this bizarre and fascinating tale is a man named Choi Gab. He was not a mastermind criminal with a team of hackers or a stash of explosives. He was a 50-year-old practitioner of yoga who had spent more than 20 years perfecting the art of flexibility. His life had been a revolving door of petty crimes and incarcerations, but inside the concrete walls of prison, he had found a discipline that would eventually make him world famous. Choi Gab had conditioned his muscle and ligaments to stretch beyond the capacity of an average person. This unique skill set would soon be put to the ultimate test in a high-security holding cell in the city of Daegu. The city of Daegu is a bustling metropolis in South Korea, known for its humid climate and surrounding mountains. In September of 2012, the local police force had detained Choi Gab on suspicion of robbery. He was brought to the Daegu Dongbu police station, which was a standard facility designed to hold suspects before their transfer to larger prisons. The officers on duty saw just another middle-aged suspect who was slightly shorter than average and weighed around 52 kilograms. They had no reason to suspect that this unassuming man possessed the physical capabilities of a contortionist. They processed him and placed him in a holding cell that was believed to be inescapable. The holding cell was a small room secured by thick iron bars. At the bottom of the cell door, there was a rectangular food slot. This opening was designed strictly for passing trays of food and water to the detainee. The dimensions of this slot were incredibly small, measuring roughly 15 centimeters in height and 45 centimeters in width. To put that into perspective, the height of the slot was slightly less than the length of a standard smartphone. No adult human should have been able to fit their head through such a gap, let alone their shoulders and torso. The police officers felt completely secure leaving Choi Gab alone in the cell as they went about their night shift duties. Choi Gab sat in his cell and surveyed his surroundings with the calm focus of a master yogi. He knew that the guards were becoming less attentive as the early hours of the morning approached. The station was quiet, and the rhythmic breathing of sleeping detainees in other cells provided a backdrop to his plan. He had been preparing for this moment not just since his arrest, but for decades. His practice of yoga was not merely for health or meditation. It was a tool for survival and dominance over his own physical limitations. He eyed the food slot and visualized his body flowing through it like water. He waited patiently for the guards to fall into a deep slumber. To facilitate his impossible exit, Choi Gab requested a special skin ointment before the lights went out. He claimed he had a skin condition that required treatment. The unsuspecting officers handed him the tube of ointment without a second thought. This lubricant would prove to be the key to his freedom. Around 5 in the morning, when the station was at its quietest, Choi Gab stripped off his shirt and pants. He began to apply the ointment liberally over his upper body and head. He coated his skin until it was slick and slippery, reducing the friction that would otherwise tear his flesh apart against the cold metal of the food slot. The process began with a series of deep stretches to loosen his joints. Choi Gab knelt before the small rectangular opening. He first pushed his head through the gap. This was the most dangerous part of the maneuver. If his skull got stuck, he would be trapped in a compromising position, unable to retreat or advance. He exhaled deeply, compressing his chest cavity to its absolute minimum volume. With a sickening squeeze, his head popped through the other side of the bars. He was now looking out into the corridor, but the bulk of his body remained inside the cell. The true challenge was about to begin, as he needed to maneuver his shoulders through the narrow space. Shoulders are typically the widest part of the human torso and are supported by the rigid structure of the clavicle and scapula. For an ordinary person, compressing the shoulders to a width of 15 centimeters is biologically impossible without breaking bones. However, Choi Gab had the ability to dislocate and manipulate his joints to an extreme degree. He rotated one arm forward and the other backward, angling his body diagonally to minimize his width. He writhed and twisted, inching his way through the metal frame. The friction burned his skin despite the ointment, but he remained silent, suppressing any grunts of pain that might wake the sleeping guards nearby. The security cameras inside the police station were rolling the entire time, capturing this surreal event in grainy black and white footage. The video shows a ghostly figure emerging from the bottom of the cell door like a specter. It took him approximately 34 seconds to squeeze the entirety of his body through the slot. 34 seconds of intense physical exertion and contortion. Once his hips cleared the opening, he pulled his legs through with ease. He stood up in the corridor, a free man within the station. He quickly put his clothes back on and glanced around to ensure his escape had gone unnoticed. Getting out of the cell was only the first hurdle. Choi Gab now had to exit the police station itself without alerting the officers stationed at the front desk. He moved with the stealth of a cat, avoiding the main corridors where he might be spotted. He found a window on the first floor that was not as heavily secured as the holding cells. He managed to squeeze through the window bars, which were slightly wider than the food slot, but still a tight fit for an average person. He dropped to the ground outside the station and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness of Daegu, leaving behind an empty cell and a baffled police force. When the guards finally checked the cells later that morning, they were greeted by a baffling sight. The cell door was still locked. The bars were intact and uncut. There was no tunnel and no hidden hatch. Yet the prisoner was gone. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. Panic set in immediately. The officers checked the security footage and watched in disbelief as the man they had arrested simply poured himself out of the cell. The realization of what had happened brought a mix of shock and embarrassment to the Daegu Police Department. They had been outsmarted by a master of yoga. The media quickly picked up the story, and sensational headlines spread across South Korea and the world. Choi Gab was dubbed the Korean Houdini. The public was equal parts amused and terrified by the idea that a criminal could escape a high-security facility using nothing but flexibility. The police were under immense pressure to recapture him. A massive manhunt was launched involving hundreds of officers' helicopter and search dogs. Checkpoints were established on all major roads leading out of Daegu. The police released his photo and description to the public, warning that he was a robbery suspect and extremely agile. Choi Gab knew that the city was too dangerous for him. With his face plastered on every news channel, he needed to find a place where cameras and patrols could not reach him. He headed for the mountains that surround Daegu. The terrain was rugged and densely forested, offering plenty of hiding spots. He was comfortable with hardship and had the physical stamina to survive in the wild. He moved quickly, putting distance between himself and the urban center. He scavenged for food and water, relying on his survival instincts to stay one step ahead of the closing net. The search focused on Mount Palgong, a large mountain range north of Daegu. Police had received tips and found traces, suggesting the fugitive was heading in that direction. The operation to find him became one of the largest in the region's history. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras scanned the forest canopy, while teams of officers combed the undergrowth. Despite the technology and manpower, Choi Gab managed to evade capture for several days. He used the dense foliage to mask his movements and traveled mostly at night to avoid detection. During his time on the run, Choi Gab left taunting clues for the police. In an abandoned hut on the mountain, investigators found a note he had written. In the note, he claimed his innocence regarding the robbery charges and apologized for causing trouble. This added a layer of psychological complexity to the case. He was not just a fugitive running for his life. He was a man trying to communicate his side of the story, while actively humiliating the law enforcement agency that had detained him. The note was analyzed by profilers who tried to predict his next move, based on his handwriting and choice of words. The physical toll of the escape and the subsequent flight began to wear on him. Living in the mountains without proper supplies is grueling even for a fit individual. The nights were getting colder and food was scarce. Choi Gab had to constantly keep moving to avoid the search teams that were systematically closing in on his location. The police tightened the perimeter around the mountain, forcing him into a smaller and smaller area. They used dogs to track his scent, hoping that exhaustion would eventually cause him to make a mistake. On the 6th day of the manhunt, the police finally closed in. A resident in a nearby village reported spotting a man who matched the description of the fugitive. The police converged on the area, swarming the location with overwhelming numbers. They found Choi Gab hiding in a cardboard box on the roof of a residential building in the city of Muryang, roughly 30 kilometers south of Daegu. He had managed to slip out of the mountain cordon, but could not escape the vigilance of the public. He was exhausted, hungry, and covered in scratches from his time in the woods. The capture was swift. Choi Gab did not resist. He was surrounded by officers who were taking no chances this time. They handcuffed him and immediately placed him under heavy guard. The embarrassment of the first escape meant that the police were determined to ensure he did not pull another disappearing act. He was transported back to the police station, but this time the security measures were drastically different. The legend of the yoga escape artist had made the authorities paranoid, and rightly so. Upon his return to custody, Choi Gab was placed in a cell with a food slot that was significantly smaller. The police had welded metal bars across the opening to reduce its size to a mere 11 centimeters in height, ensuring that no human head could pass through. They also assigned guards to watch him 24 hours a day. The interrogation that followed focused not just on his robbery charges, but on the mechanics of his escape. Investigators wanted to know every detail of how he had accomplished the feat to prevent anyone else from replicating it. The story of Choi Gab highlights a significant oversight in prison design. For decades, architects and security experts assumed that a gap of 15 centimeters was safe, because the human head is generally larger than that. They relied on average anatomical data. They did not account for the outliers, the individuals who exist at the extreme edges of human capability. This case forced a review of detention center standards across South Korea. It proved that static defenses are only as effective as the assumptions they are built upon. Psychologists and criminologists analyze the mindset required for such an escape. It requires a unique combination of desperation, discipline, and pain tolerance. Most people would panic halfway through the slot when their chest is compressed and their breath is restricted. The fear of getting stuck is a powerful deterrent. Choi Gab, however, possessed the mental fortitude to remain calm under extreme physical duress. His yoga practice likely gave him the ability to control his breathing and heart rate, preventing the panic response that would have been fatal. The legal consequences for Choi Gab were severe. In addition to the original robbery charges, he now faced charges for the escape itself. The escape from custody is a serious offense that carries significant prison time. The court was not lenient. The judge acknowledged his physical skills, but emphasized that they did not exempt him from the law. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The escape, which had captivated the nation, ultimately added years to his confinement. While in prison, Choi Gab became something of a celebrity among the inmates. His story was whispered in the exercise yards and mess halls. He was the man who beat the system with his bare hands. However, the prison administration was less charmed. He was classified as a high-flight risk. His cell was inspected daily, and he was subject to more frequent searches than other prisoners. The very skill that had briefly given him freedom now ensured that his incarceration would be more restrictive than ever. This incident also sparked a broader discussion about the use of yoga and physical training in prisons. While exercise is generally encouraged for rehabilitation, and mental health authorities became wary of inmates developing extreme physical capabilities. There was a debate about whether certain types of advanced physical training should be monitored or restricted. It raised the question of where the line is drawn between healthy exercise and training for an escape. The escape of Choi Gab is often compared to other famous prison breaks, but it stands out for its simplicity. There were no spoons used to dig through walls, no papier-mâché heads left in beds, and no guards bribed. It was a purely organic escape. It stripped the conflict down to man versus metal. The metal was rigid and unyielding, while the man was fluid and adaptable. In that specific contest, fluidity won. It is a testament to the power of adaptation over rigid structure. In the years following the escape, the Daegu police station upgraded its facilities. The food slots were resized, and additional sensors were installed in the holding areas. The footage of the escape became a training tool for correctional officers. It is shown to new recruits as a warning never to underestimate a detainee. The lesson is clear: security is not just about locks and bars. It is about vigilance and understanding the potential of the human adversary. The legacy of Choi Gab lives on in the folklore of true crime. He remains a prime example of how reality can be stranger than fiction. If a movie director had included a scene where a man squeezes through a food slot, audiences might have rolled their eyes, calling it unrealistic. Yet the grainy black and white footage exists as irrefutable proof. It serves as a reminder that the limits of what is possible are often set by our own expectations rather than reality. As we reflect on this case, it forces us to reconsider the concept of confinement. We build walls and cages believing they are absolute. We trust in steel and concrete to keep society safe. But the human spirit and the human body are capable of extraordinary things when pushed to the brink. The escape of the yoga master challenges the very notion of the inescapable. It suggests that with enough time, patience, and pain, almost any barrier can be overcome. Ultimately, the story is a tragedy for Choi Gab. His incredible talent was wasted on a life of crime. Had he applied his discipline and physical gifts to a legitimate career, he might have been a celebrated athlete or a renowned teacher. Instead, he is remembered as the fugitive who fit through the food slot. His life serves as a cautionary tale about wasted potential and the fleeting nature of freedom, gained through illicit means. We are left with the haunting image of a man squeezing through a gap smaller than a sheet of paper. It is an image that embodies the primal urge for liberty. It is uncomfortable to watch, yet impossible to look away from. It reminds us that no matter how high the walls or how thick the bars, there will always be those who try to find a way out. The escape of Choi Gab will remain one of the most peculiar and memorable chapters in the history of high-security prisons.